My name's Melissa Delana. I'm a real estate attorney at Delana Law Office, and today we're talking about selling real estate or buying real estate when there's a multifamily or tenant involved. There are so many things that need to be considered when there's a property with a tenant occupying it, because one of the first things needs to be addressed is whether or not the tenant has a lease agreement. Lease agreements will survive closings, and as a result, a buyer is going to assume that tenancy. This will require for the seller to sign what's known as an assignment of the lease so that the new buyer can take over the landlord position. Additionally, as part of the closing, there will need to be adjustments for rental income and applicable security deposits for the tenant, because it will be the buyer's responsibility to refund the security deposit to the tenant when they eventually leave after the closing. It's important to understand that the purchase and sales agreements already prescribe that rents are deemed current as part of the closing. So if a seller, for example, is selling a property but they have not collected rent for several months from an existing tenant, it's important to make sure that that is being addressed by way of an addendum or referenced in the body of the purchase and sales agreement. Without that being addressed, then it is going to be the seller's responsibility to make a rental adjustment as if they collected rent even though they have not. Additionally, the seller is going to be responsible to furnish a lot of information about the tenants. In addition to copies of the leases, there should be contact information shared. There will also need to be a letter sent to the tenants identifying that the property is subject to sale and advising them of the new buyer. The estoppel letter is probably the single most important thing that is required for real estate closings, and it's something that is being newly implemented by many offices, including our own. An estoppel letter is actually signed by the tenant, identifying and acknowledging how much rent, when the last time the rent was paid, and how much security deposit is on account. If those items are not being acknowledged, then the buyer is running the risk of the tenant later, after the closing, saying, no, that security deposit is not the amount that I paid to the previous landlord/seller. We actually had more money, and now the buyer is in a position where they have to fight with this tenant. Estoppel letters are very important. Lastly, if you're involved in a transaction where the buyer would like for any of the tenants to vacate the premises before the closing, perhaps it's a single family home and the buyers are planning to use the property for themselves, it's really important that an accurate timeline is being addressed. Sometimes tenants do not vacate voluntarily. Sometimes the seller will actually have to go through with a formal eviction process. So it's really crucial that we are addressing in advance of the purchase and sales agreement, and certainly in advance of the closing, if we are going to be able to satisfy the terms of the sales contract. For more information about being involved in a multifamily property, please feel free to give us a call at our office, 401-885-3800.